but they certainly have unicorn-like values, and that is what we're attempting to uncover and discover through their story. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a big round of applause to our achievers here as we quick start our She Shakti session with Swayam Shakti. Leesa, I'm going to start by talking to you, because in many ways, ladies and gentlemen, Leesa's story was not just about starting up, but it was about starting over. I don't know how many of you will know this, but in 2013, she's of course a classical dancer, had spent her whole life dancing. That was her passion, that was her life. But in 2013, you were on a transatlantic flight. You had a medical emergency. That medical condition led you to give up dancing altogether. And in 2014, you decided to change your passion. You decided to reignite the spark that you had, the love for dance, and converted that into a collective. Leesa, I want you to talk to me about starting over, the resilience, the grace, and courage that it took for you to do so.
Yeah. Thank you, Shereen. I think behind all this strength, alas, the most important thing is faith. And I'm thankful to my father, my parents, who taught us from day one to be connected to a supreme soul. For us, it was Krishna. So Krishna Bhakti was resounding in our house all the time. And my father said, "Mu thai no thai, Krishna thibo." So that connection was said. And that faith did work wonder. And the second thing was self-belief. Since childhood, I have been into debate, into all kinds of extracurricular activities, winning, losing, all the time. So I had learned in the process of last 30, 35 years, the idea is to keep moving. I think that is what helped me. So one is self-belief, and the second one is, let's not get too much into spirituality, but faith matters.
Faith absolutely matters, and you've taught us the audacity of hope. You've really reinvented yourself, taking charge of your life once again, getting it back in control after a very debilitating illness. And you're today spearheading Nirguna, which is trying to uplift women in rural parts of the country. And you're getting artisans, weavers together, and you're trying to change their lives through the work that you're doing.
Yeah, because actually I'm learning in the process. When you get into the grassroots, you'll see how hard, it's a lot of hard work. It's a lot of patience. They take a month or two to be a sari, many of them. And still, they won't earn that kind of money had they been a clerk, officer attendant, somewhere else. But still, they are artists, because that is I always treat my viewers as artists.
Yes.
That creativity, that kick they get out of it, creating something that cannot come from being employed somewhere else.
Well, that's an example of patient capital. That's the kind of capital that we require, where people are actually investing their time, energy. It's not just about money, but it's investing your time, energy, and your passion into helping others as well. Akshita, I want to come to you now. And you decided to give up on a career. You were part of the corporate world, you were outside of India, you decided to come back and in a way reclaim your identity, reclaim your roots. Why did you feel the need to do that? Why is it that you want to convert, in your words, this property into a platform that helps connect people and tell the stories that you believe need to be told?
So I come from Bhanj, and now it's very familiar with our President of India. But while I was growing up, it was known as a district which has one of the poorest districts of India. It was an aspirational district for many years. It's in the northernmost part of Orissa. It was also known as a place with insurgency. It was part of the Red Corridor. And so growing up, we had a narrative we told ourselves when we come from places like this. These are places on conflict. Things like this happen over there. This is what you expect from places like this. And we were known very much for our development or our lower development indicators than actually the talent or the entrepreneurship or the resilience. And so when I was growing up and I had kind of traveled the world and I was in New York and I was working there, I kind of met someone when I was back in India. And if you come from a place which is not a capital, you'll always be like, instead of saying you come from you come from wherever you do, you say, I come somewhere close to Chennai or close to Bangalore, close to Bombay. you kind of become the stories you've heard yourself talk about, or you become the stories you've heard of. And so I met a very young girl and I asked her where she was from and she said, oh, I come from Bangalore. And so she's, where are you from? I said, I come from Mayurbhanj. And she's like, oh, I actually also come from Bhadrak, which is near Mayurbhanj. She's like, but no one knows places in Odisha, so we don't say it. And I felt so bad that we actually grew up embarrassed of where we come from. And so something I wanted to do in my life was retell the story of the place I come from. Because when we come from somewhere, we recognize it not just because of the development indicator of the GDP, but we recognize it because of the strength of our grandmothers. Or we know the best Michelin star cooks can sometimes be the people working in our houses. So I think that it was important for me to come back, and the last bastion of my family legacy, the Mayurbhanj dynasty, was a home for foreign dignitaries called the Belgadia Palace. And all the architecture in Mayurbhanj was built by women rulers because the men were usually fighting. So you see, the thing about women is, we know that we can do it. Hum kar sakte hain. Sometimes we just wait for that permission or someone's hand holding, someone to give us that extra raise or the job, or allow us permission to go out and take the job. We know we can do the job. We just need a little bit of support. So I think Belgaria was the support I wanted to be able to give to the people in the community. And you're right, it's not a startup. However, we wanted to build it on the principles of a startup. So when people come and stay with us, a percentage of funds can actually go back to mobilize nonprofits in the community, such as Mayurbhanj Chhau, which is actually a dance form which was patronized by the Royal Army. So not allowed to be performed by women. But you see, now that the men are all leaving for jobs, it's the women's responsibility to carry on our cultural traditions and storytelling, albeit in a different way. So for me, it was important that actually to start off, rather than a business or something else, actually all of us can start off with just changing the narrative and the story. It doesn't require capital, but more communication.
Absolutely. It requires capital, it requires commitment, and it requires consistent communication. And you've been able to sort of now unapologetically tell your story. Yeah?
Yes, yes.
Absolutely. And that's wonderful to see. But Lachic, I want to come to you now because there are many similarities in the stories that we just heard here from Akshita as well as your story. You were also working abroad, you were in Japan, and then you decided to come back to India because it was what your grandmother told you, and Lachic comes from Ladakh, and your grandmother told you, what will you do for our land? So Lachic, what are you hoping to do for your land?
Yes, so I share a very similar story, and it's so nice to hear it, and I totally resonate with what you've said as well. I chose to move to Ladakh in 2017, also seeing how much Ladakh had changed. I think my memories of Ladakh as a child didn't exist the way I remember it, and I think Dolkhar, which I've set up in Leh right now, was a medium to sort of preserve that, and it was a very personal journey for me because I didn't get the opportunity to grow up there, but I always felt connected to the place. And 4 years of constructing Dolkhar taught me so much more about my own land, my own community, my people, and tourism it runs Ladakh's economy, so it had to be the driving force to sort of create that meaningful impact, and that's what we've tried to do through Dolkhar, and just taking inspiration from traditional values and practices.
both these ladies are being very modest. It is the Time magazine that says Mayurbhanj as well as Ladakh are the places to visit in 2023, and both of these women-led tourism, hospitality businesses are actually making that change happen. So a big round of applause to Lachic and Akshita. But Talha, I want to come to you. Stella is a lawyer. She's been practicing law for 2 decades now. But you decided to start up in 2012, Stella. And not just that, the mission in the last few years really has been to try and open up the pipeline of talent to people who may not necessarily have access to the kind of education that you and I had access to. Take me through what you're hoping to do with the Law Foundation and the Accelerator program and why this means so much to you.
So I think the trigger has been more because of my background. I grew up in Srinagar and I had to move out because of all the trouble that was there. And I think that taught me to be fearless and a certain amount of resilience. I'll give you, very quickly, I'll give you 3 specific examples. When I moved from Srinagar to Wellams, we were not used to, I knew English, but we weren't used to talking in English. And that took time for me to make friends. And that's where I learned how to adapt. And then when I moved for a job to Bombay, I wanted to be financially independent. So I didn't take money from parents. So that's where I learned financial independence. All of these I mentioned because I think today I'm a sum of all my experiences. So, you know, adapting to the environment, being able to be financially independent. And when I started Lawyers at Work, which is my law firm, at that time, there weren't that many women-led law firms, and I didn't even have a
There
partner.
are still not that many women-led law firms.
So, so I think I had this thing, what's the worst that can happen? If I'm an entrepreneur, everyone will want to take me for a job. So what's the worst? If it doesn't work, I will get a job. I was quite confident. So I had that self-confidence. I built it. It doesn't happen, you know, the mind chatter and all of that. So I built it for myself. And sure enough, it's been over 10 years and I've been able to continue it. That's my corporate.
Yes.
But for the foundation, actually, it was when I was running once. I mean, if I may take a moment,
Please.
because that was the turning point. I was running around the lake and I saw this girl on a Sunday morning and she was going for her exam and she was very excited. She wasn't one of those children who said Sunday morning exam. She said, you know, here we have lockdowns, all of that, and therefore these were COVID days when allowances were made for sitting at home. And she said, I'm just happy I'll get to go and I may get promoted to the next class. She had a sparkle in her eye.
Yeah.
And you know, she knew opportunity cost. And I said, this is a child. Like, she was really young. I said, if they don't have this kind of, some kind of support, and I always wanted to come back and do something. I said, I've had the privilege of exposure and I've had a very good life. So I wanted to come back and do something, and that's when I said, Law Foundation has to be set up where we train young law students over a program which runs parallel with the colleges with the end goal of trying to get them jobs. That's
well,
basically
and that does deserve a big round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, because it takes a lot. It takes a lot to be able to create these pipelines and these pools of talent and to be able to give back. But, you know, I want to pick up on what I heard from each one of you. And I'm going to sort of rephrase Mark Twain because he said, never let your schooling interfere with your education. And I want to understand from each one of you, you know, doubts, fears, the fear of failure, etc. Did that ever constrain your dream of becoming an entrepreneur? Was that ever a question in your mind? Akshita, I'll start by asking you. And how did you cope with that? How did you deal with that?
Yes. So I think that one of the best decisions, even though my parents put us in, my parents cared more about sports day than report day, just to give you an understanding. But one of the best extracurriculars they put me in was theater. So then, you know, like I stood outside before entering and I saw the roster and I saw who was interviewing me. And I was like, oh my God, that's the imposter syndrome creeping in. Just fight that today. Walk into the room. You belong here. And
you do belong here. Each one of you belongs here. And you know, this is something a lot of women, and I personally have felt the imposter syndrome as well. There's this self-doubt that's sticking in your mind. And I want to understand from each one of you your mechanism of dealing with that.
Yeah, so like I was saying, I think that I had, you know, once you've done theater for a number of years, you know how to wear a mask. So then I'm like, okay, now I'm entering, and I think that's something I remind myself of when I get nervous is like, you're here representing Mayur Bhanj. There are people here who, you have this opportunity because you also have privilege, because someone is able to find you online, because you speak the right language, because you dress a certain way, because your education. So remember that when you're here, it's an opportunity to kick the door open and wider for a number of people who aren't able to have their stories and voices heard. So every time I come for an event like this or I go somewhere, I remember why I'm doing it, and that purpose, I think, gives me the strength to overcome any of the mind chatter.
Lachic, what were the fears? Do you still have them? How do you deal with it? And what is it that you would like to say to other young women who are looking at the possibility of starting up, but somehow shrink themselves into little boxes because they're unsure and uncertain?
I think at the end of the day, if you're, you know, certain of what you want and your intentions are right and you're doing things that, you know, you can go to bed and sleep in peace and you know you're doing the right thing, I think there's nothing that can stop you. Yes, I have been through multiple moments of doubt. When I moved back and I started construction, I was 26. So everybody around me doubted me, so that didn't help either. But I knew what I was doing. And even if you're the only person who believes in yourself, at the end of the day, you're answerable to yourself.
Yeah.
And if you're honest and you know you're doing the right thing, people come around. And you just have to continue doing it, and you have to consistently do it with the right intentions and the right motive. I think that's what's
That's
taken
so
me through.
beautifully said, because very often we seek external validation, and in fact, that is what we live for. But at the end of the day, as you said, we're accountable to ourselves, to our own conscience. We're answerable to our calling, and each one of you is a representation of that. Leesa, I want to understand from you, what is the vision that you now have as far as Nirguna is concerned? Where would you like to take this? And what impact do you believe you're making in the lives of the women that you're dealing with today?
Yeah. Nirguna, the way I have visualized it, the path I have followed is the holistic development of a community. So in a holistic development, what I always say to my customers, don't look at a sari as a product. It is a service to a community. You're talking the tradition, the culture, the local motives, the local rituals of that place. When you say Sambalpuri sari, we're talking about Sambalpuri people, right? Similarly, when I went to do the interior recesses of Odisha, and suddenly one day I realized, oh, there is something called Dhalapathar close to Bhubaneswar, I don't know.
Yeah.
And that is a sari, I'm wearing that sari. We revived the sari. After 100 years, it was lost in time.
Yeah.
So those kind of things, the revival of weaves, documentation. For last 8 years, we were doing video documentation of local culture, local tradition, local weaves, their motives. So somebody have to preserve our tradition, because that is where India lies.
Yes, and that is how brands are built. Brands are not built on the strength of just the product alone. Brands are built on the strength of the stories that they represent. And what a wonderful sari you're wearing here, Leesa, today. So thank you very much for sharing the story of the sari that you're wearing. But Talha, let me ask you, what is it that you hope to do with the foundation? What is the kind of impact that you would like to make?
I think what we realized, we thought we were trying to get jobs, but we realized that we are effectively making a systemic change. Because it's not just, in Kashmir, J&K, usually there's not much of a private sector, so there's only government sector. So just the shift from government sector to private jobs, that itself, people have to get used to it. Secondly, women moving out, because we can't take all the jobs there right now. So people moving out, mobility, are they willing to move out, insecurities, etc. That's another. So there are a lot of, I think what I realize, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint.
Yes.
So you have to kind of stick with it. It's going to be very slow, because it has to be systemic change rather than just the few jobs you get. So I think you have to be very aware of that and not get discouraged. Keep encouraging yourself and pivot as and when required to make that.
Oh, absolutely. You have to have the agility and the dynamism. I want to end by asking each one of you, and I'll start with you, Akshita, what we just heard there from Talha as well, that, this is not a sprint, it's a marathon. You've got to keep at it. So I'm going to get each one of you to pass the baton on to the other. And the one thing that you believe that we as a society, as civil society, can do to ensure that we see more women participate in the workforce, in the formal economy, and the one thing that you believe the government needs to do.
I think that, there's this idea that the focus is on women's education, and if we focus on women's education, that's going to, make sure that they're going to join the, labor force. But actually, we know that's not true. There were more women working in jobs, public and private sector in the 80s than there are today. Women are getting educated and choosing not to work. So I think that we need to take a hard look at who is framing the rules of society and work, and what is, if that's working for women. I mean, I've been working for 7 years, and this is the first job I have. I'm still working in the corporate sector and doing both. But this is the first job I have that there are sanitary napkins in the bathrooms at Dasra, the nonprofit I work in Bombay. And that's really important, right? I mean, something so small is like, like creating safe spaces for women at work, making sure that work from home, hybrid work, whether that works or not. And also, I think what's important is when we talk about women at work, we focus on urban women and jobs which are, say, white-collar jobs, and we completely disregard rural,
Yes.
Rural women, women from Dalit communities, indigenous communities. When we're talking about women, we have to also talk about transgender women and their rights.
Inclusion in all its,
Yes. Yeah, I think you said it there,
absolutely. Lachic, very quickly in 10 seconds, the one thing that you would like us to take away from this conversation.
I think as an entrepreneur and as like a woman entrepreneur, the most important thing and the biggest challenge is usually finance. And I think the government really needs to work towards providing more financial support to women entrepreneurs. We hear about a lot of schemes, but on ground, we know the reality. So I think that is the biggest support a woman entrepreneur
Access to capital, access to finance, well made. That point is well taken. Leesa, very quickly, the one thing.
Yeah. Apart from government support, but I want to tell every one of us, let's buy a handloom sari every year.
Okay, everyone, make a commitment to buy a handloom sari, and that will go a long way. Talha, I'll end with you.
I think what we need to do is in our workspaces, I think we need to really actually indoctrinate the fact that women have issues, all of the issues. We put a lot of policies together, but implementation and execution, I think if we focused more on that than adding just policies, I think that would be really the key.
Policies need to be made for people. People should not have to customize themselves to policies. Ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause for our women achievers here, kick-starting She Shakti, Swayam Shakti, representing the many faces of India. We wish you the very best of luck, and thank you so much for joining us here this afternoon. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Anand, back to you.
Thank you, ladies. Please stay there, and I'm going to request you.